The last thing I want to talk about is culture itself. Okay, and so part of the exercise that you just did was starting to get us into the conversation of culture, right? Culture is a very difficult thing to define. One time I went to Nicaragua, and I'd never been to a third world country before, and it was a real shock just to get off the airplane and suddenly walk out into an airport where the customs person was just a person sitting at a desk, and there's just people walking by them. I mean, I could have just walked right by them if I wanted to, I mean, it was a real shock. And then driving around, and construction workers had no helmets on, and a backhoe just kind of came and almost hit the Jeep we were in. And what had occurred to me was I was not even aware of the level of infrastructure that I exist in right now. I was not actually that aware of it. I mean, I know it, yeah, we're a first world country. We would describe it that way. But what does it really mean? And experientially, until you actually see something different, it's a little bit difficult to really identify what your own culture is, right? It's sort of an odd thing to suddenly realize, oh my gosh, there's all these things about my own culture I didn't realize when you see another culture. Culture inside an organization is maybe even trickier to identify because you're so immersed in your own culture, especially if you've been working here for a long time. If you've been working here for a long time, this is what you know. This is what you know. And we're talking about changing or transforming culture. And sometimes it's hard even to say what the culture is. So things like this, starting to take a look at what the culture is, but also starting to ask, well, what do we mean when we say culture? That's a big part of it. And so for the last few minutes here, I want to talk just a little bit about ways to think about culture that are very helpful as you are expanding your capacity to evolve your culture.
So these are what we're calling internal, okay? The words amazing, welcoming, passionate, scary, think they own the right of way, enjoyable, okay? These were internal characteristics when people were describing the culture. It was either an internal characteristic of an individual, of one person, and then there was also descriptions of groups of people. There was a passionate, or there was a welcoming or a warm, a group of people, right? So either one or many, but these are all internal aspects of a person. The other thing we heard were external things, okay? Again, this could be external of one person. I took a cruise, okay? There were many places visited. We noticed behavior. There were historical sites that we went to, and we noticed how they were built. Notice there was a difference between meeting people on a cruise versus in a country. The bus was pulled over, searched. These are all external things, okay? These are not describing the emotions of how did it feel when the bus was pulled over. Just the bus was pulled over and searched, right? So if you look at something from the outside, you can either look at like an individual's behavior, like I visited a site, or you can also look at the system, right? So you could look at like when the comment of how these buildings were, how these historical sites were constructed. It's not just one person's behavior, it's a group, okay? So just think internal as an individual or as a group, external as an individual or as a group. If it's just me, it would be my behavior. If we want to talk about the external structure, we could talk about the building itself here, how the room is set up. We could talk about the systems that we're using here. So this is the inside of an individual. You could think of that as like an attitude, right? A person's attitude is inside an individual. Inside a group of people, you could our word for that is culture. A group of people who have an attitude that might be warm or welcoming, or like when Bryant was talking about the Midwestern, we'd give you the shirt off our back. That's oftentimes shared by not just one person. That's why we call it culture. That's how we are. And this is outside an individual, so you might think of it as behavior. And outside of a group of people, you might say systems. Now there's a lot of words. We could put systems, architecture, okay? Again, it's something observable. What happens when there's a problem or a challenge in a company? Okay, what we do is we go to what's easier to see. Let me ask that question. What's easier to see? Systems. Great. And the second easiest to see? It's behavior. Why? Because it's observable. You can see it. You can literally see behavior. You can literally see systems. You can see architecture. You can see how a building. You can see, are people communicating? Are they managing by email? Right? You can see what someone does. But if you want to see attitude and culture, it's a little bit more challenging to see. And you can just notice, look at the list. It's shorter, right? There was a lot of things on this list. Most of what we talked about was the outside.